Elena stood at attention outside the temporary command tent, her uniform stiff from sweat and dust, her knuckles pale from how tightly she gripped the file in her hand. The desert sun scorched the back of her neck, but she didn't move. Not when the guards looked her up and down, not when they smirked at the pink scar just visible at her temple. No one took her seriously out here, not since the incident. Inside the tent, Colonel Maddox leaned over a wide field table maps and satellite photos. Scattered beneath his palms, the air conditioner hummed weakly and the room smelled of coffee and war fatigue. His aides moved like ghosts around him, their voices low, their expressions tighter than their uniforms when the sergeant entered with a quick sir request from Corporal Voss. Maddox sighed without looking up. Voss again, he said, "Let her in." Elena stepped inside the tent. The light dimmed behind her as the flap dropped. She didn't speak until he motioned. Then she approached and laid, the folder on the table, her voice steady but low. "I'm officially requesting reassignment, sir." He raised an eyebrow slowly, still not looking at her. "Why this time, Corporal?" She took a breath, knowing exactly how this would go, and still she said it. "Medical grounds, sir. Psychological as well." The moment the words left her mouth, the tension in the tent cracked like a dry branch. One of the aides chuckled under his breath. Maddox finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. "So you want out because you're shaken up over a bad patrol?" He pushed the folder away with 2 fingers, a mocking grin forming on his lips. "We've all had bad nights, Voss. This isn't kindergarten." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "So tell me the real reason you're trying to run." She didn't flinch. She had been waiting for this. The disbelief, the dismissal. She had rehearsed every word in her bunk every night since she made the decision. She opened her mouth to explain about the mission gone wrong. The ambush, the explosion, the hours crawling through sand and blood, but the colonel was already laughing, shaking his head, muttering, "Unbelievable, this is exactly why people like you shouldn't be out here." The aides didn't laugh, but their silence was worse. Their eyes avoided hers. Their hands stilled on paperwork, like they knew how this played out. She felt it again, that heavy sense that she didn't belong. Not because she wasn't capable, but because her scars weren't the kind they respected, not the visible ones, at least not the ones they could tally in. A report. Maddox stood up, slowly walking around the table until he stood in front of her, close enough she could smell the coffee on his breath. He tapped the folder with 1 finger. "Tell me, Corporal, when are you going to stop hiding behind excuses and start acting like a soldier again?" That was when she made her decision, not the one about the reassignment. She already knew that was denied the decision to show him the truth without words. She unfastened the cuff of her sleeve, slowly pulling it back inch by inch. The room was silent except for the hum of the AC and the soft rustle of fabric. The scarring started just above her wrist, jagged, uneven flesh, where smooth skin should have been. She kept pulling back the sleeve, revealing more, the twisted pattern wrapping around her forearm. The pockmarks of embedded metal removed without anesthesia in a village with no proper tools. Then the inside of her elbow where a deep groove ran, like a trench, old and ugly. She heard the sharp inhale from one of the aides, but she didn't stop. She opened the top of her shirt just enough to show the burn that crawled up her collarbone to her neck. A melted map of the IED's wrath, a reminder of the blast that had silenced 3 men instantly and left her buried under bone, and Sand. Maddox had stopped smiling. No one said a word as she rolled the sleeve back down, refastened. It looked the colonel directly in the eye and said nothing, because she didn't have to, because nothing she could say would sound louder than what she had just shown. But even then she knew it wasn't over. She could see it in his eyes, in the flicker of doubt giving way to something else. Not sympathy, not respect, something more dangerous. Something she had seen before in the aftermath of silence. The kind of look that meant this wasn't the end of the conversation. This wasn't the worst thing he would ask of her, and whatever came next, it would not be written down. The silence after she revealed her scars hung in the air like smoke too thick to breathe, and yet no one moved. No one spoke. Not even Maddox, who only stared at her arm as if it were a weapon he had never seen before. And perhaps it was. Because in this place, truth was often the most dangerous weapon of all. Elena stood motionless, not because she was waiting for his approval, but because she knew how fragile this moment was. One wrong word, and he would twist it into insubordination. One false move, and she would be packing out of this base before the sun dropped below the ridge. But she had not come this far to back down. Not again. Maddox finally looked away, turning toward the map again, but he did not sit. His fingers traced a supply route across the dusty paper, then tapped, once, then again. He spoke without facing her, his voice low and measured, like he was no longer talking to a subordinate, but to a variable in a mission too complex to fail. "You still want reassignment," he said, his tone flat. No judgment, no laughter now. Just calculation. She hesitated, but only for a moment. "Yes, sir." He nodded slowly. "Then you will first complete one more assignment. Consider it your transfer fee." She said nothing, waiting for the catch. Because there was always a catch, he pointed to a cluster of marks along the border, a red circle drawn hastily around a name she did not recognize, a small village too close to a contested zone. He spoke of a convoy that had gone dark 3 days. Ago local militia blamed bad weather, but satellite picked up movement there last night too. Organized too fast for any storm. He turned to her now, finally meeting her eyes again, and what she saw there made her stomach tighten. Not cruelty, not doubt, but something colder than either utility. He did not care if she was broken, only if she was useful. "You leave at 0400, take only what you can carry. No backup, no radio contact until extraction window opens in 48 hours. He paused, then added, "Consider this your last chance to prove you're not the excuse you gave me." She wanted to argue, wanted to ask why her alone, why now, but deep down, she already knew this was not a mission. It was a message, and she was the envelope sealed with her own. Silence. Back in her quarters. Elena packed without thinking. Muscle memory guiding her hands, weapons rations, medical supplies, no room for hesitation, no space for fear, and yet it crept in anyway, slipping through the cracks of her mind like smoke, under a door, the kind of fear that doesn't shout but whispers and waits. She looked around the room one last time. The metal bed frame, the dented locker, the small photo of her squad tucked into the corner of the mirror, and for a second, she allowed herself to remember the sound of their laughter before everything changed, before the blast, before she carried 2 of them on her back and buried the 3rd with her bare hands. The ride out was quiet. The Humvee driven by a corporal who didn't ask questions and didn't meet her eyes. They stopped at the last forward post, just as the sun began to rise, the mountains casting long shadows across the dirt. She stepped out alone, her boots sinking slightly into the dust, and with every step, she felt the weight of this, not just the gear or the mission, but the expectation, the quiet dare, the unspoken challenge Maddox had thrown down like a gauntlet. She moved fast, staying low every hour, deeper into terrain she had memorized, but never trusted. The village appeared just past midday, a scattering of buildings half abandoned, half alive. She saw figures move in the distance, slow, deliberate, not villagers, not farmers. These men moved like they had orders. She kept to the edge, watching, noting escape routes, blind spots, bodies too still under shade cloths, rifles held too casually to be at rest. The blade at her neck was steady, not trembling, not hesitant, the way untrained hands would be. It was the kind of touch that came with purpose, not rage, which made it more dangerous, because whoever stood behind her was not afraid to use it and would not need to twice. Elena did not speak. Not yet. She kept her breathing even, her pulse low and silent, as if the calm might confuse him or buy her a second more, because that was sometimes all it took, a second to shift, to strike, to run. but the ground beneath her boots told her there would be no running, not this time. The voice behind her spoke again, not louder but firmer now, as if confirming a suspicion. "I was told you might come alone. I see they were right," she finally answered slowly, carefully, her voice low enough to match his and steady enough to remind him she was not the one in danger. "Just yet. Depends who they are and what they think I am." The pressure of the blade eased slightly, just enough for her to breathe, but not enough to relax. He moved into her peripheral, now not masked, not covered. Just a thin, dark scarf pulled around his neck and a rifle slung low across his chest. His eyes sharp, his expression unreadable as he said, "Follow me," and turned his back on her without fear. He could have pulled her sidearm, right. Then ended him in one shot. But she didn't. Because something about the way he moved, something about the way he had waited, made her curious, and curiosity on the field was a currency sometimes more valuable than bullets. He led her through the broken shells of houses, through narrow alleys that smelled of metal and earth and smoke, until they came to a cellar door hidden behind a stack of torn grain sacks. He knocked twice, paused then once more, before the door creaked open from within, revealing a face half shadow, half suspicion. Inside the cellar there were others, not many but enough to matter, men and women armed, not in uniform, not local either. Judging by the gear, Western, by the boots, and the body armor, but not military, at least not officially. She counted 6 in total before the door closed behind her, locking her in. They looked at her the way wolves looked at a new scent, not attacking, but not welcoming. Either one of them stepped forward, tall, lean, with a scar across his lip, and said, "So she really came alone." Maddox wasn't lying, and just like that, she knew what this was. This wasn't a mission, it was a test. No worse, it was a setup, the kind that got buried under classified folders. And rewritten field reports, the kind of story no one told because no one who lived it wanted to remember, and no one who died got the chance. The man with the scar introduced himself as Rayner and nodded toward a map spread across a wooden crate. It showed the same village, the same hills, the same extraction point she had memorized before leaving camp, but there were markings. Hers didn't have hidden routes, signals, times, names coded, but precise. Rayner explained without waiting for her to ask. They were an unaffiliated unit operating beyond sanctioned borders, gathering intel on a rogue commander suspected of arming local factions in exchange for mineral rights. And they had reason to believe that commander was sitting in her camp, wearing her flag and giving her orders. She didn't want to believe it, couldn't believe it, and yet the pieces began falling like dominoes, the denied requests, the untraceable supply runs, the red-circled village. Suddenly it all looked like one long corridor, and at the end of it was Maddox. She asked why now, and Rayner's answer came too easily because you're expendable but not forgettable. They needed someone no one would miss, but everyone would question if they vanished someone. Broken enough to be disbelieved, but sharp enough to follow breadcrumbs. And when Maddox read your file, he knew you were the perfect cutout. She stood there, the weight of the room, pressing in the betrayal, curdling in her chest, worse than fear, worse than pain. It was the knowing, the absolute knowing that she had been marked from the moment she showed him her scars, and he saw not weakness but utility. Then Rayner pulled a sealed bag from a steel case. Inside was a burner phone, a GPS module, and a dossier with one name on it. Not Maddox, not the arms dealer, but someone else entirely. Someone she thought was dead, someone whose dog tags she had buried with her own hands after the ambush in Sector 9. And when she opened the folder, when she saw the photo paper clipped to the top and the coordinates beneath it, she understood that everything she thought she had survived had only been the prologue. Because if the man in that photo was still alive, then someone had lied to her about more than just orders, and if he was working with them, then the truth she thought she had clawed through fire to find was nothing but smoke. Elena stared at the photo in her hand, the edges worn as if someone had folded and unfolded it 100 times. The man in the picture was looking past the camera, not posing, just caught in the middle of emotion. His jaw tense, his eyes shadowed by the brim of a helmet, and even though his uniform was newer, even though his face was leaner, she knew it was. Him, she knew it before she saw the name stamped in black ink beneath the photo staff Sergeant Calder Hayes, presumed KIA 2 years ago in Sector 9, buried under collapsed rock after the ambush, declared dead, identified by DNA confirmed by dog. Tags that Elena herself had found bloodied and scorched near the crater where half her squad had disappeared. She remembered the moment she picked them up, the weight of the metal, the taste of dust and smoke in her mouth, the scream that died in her throat when the medevac lifted without his body, because they told her no one survived that blast. But now here he was, sitting in a grainy photo alive, wearing a different patch and working with a group that claimed Maddox was dealing in weapons, and secrets, and worse. Rayner watched her with that same unreadable look, the one that told her he expected her to break, maybe cry, maybe scream. But she did none of those things. She just placed the photo back into the folder, closed it slowly, then looked him in the eye and asked where. He gave her the coordinates, a compound 30 clicks east, past the dry riverbed and into no man's land, a zone unpatrolled, unmarked, but monitored, always monitored. He said they had a window to intercept a shipment. Due to leave at dawn, and Calder was listed on the manifest not as cargo, not as escort, but as handler. She echoed quietly, and the word felt like a needle threading through her memories, stitching together moments that had never made sense. Until now, the classified briefings, the changed patrol routes, the sealed comms logs after the ambush, now it all pointed to one thing: betrayal. The plan was simple, which meant it was probably a lie she would move at night solo through the ridgeline, enter the compound via the old irrigation tunnel and identify. Calder confirm it was him, confirm he was involved, and then if possible bring him back for interrogation. If not, then eliminate the target and extract before sunrise. They gave her new gear stripped of serials and tracking tags, a suppressed sidearm, a flash drive loaded with encrypted data, and a radio that only broadcasted one-way outbound, only in case of failure. She left before midnight, the desert swallowing her footfalls, the stars watching without judgment, and each step forward was a step deeper into something she could not name, a space between duty and doubt, where every answer carried a price she might not be willing to pay. The compound came into view just before 3. Its perimeter quiet. Too quiet for a site supposedly hosting weapons and rogue assets. The guards moved slow, unconcerned, as if they knew no one would come, as if they knew no one could find them. But Elena had always found what others missed. That was what made her dangerous. Not her aim, not her strength. Her ability to see the angles others ignored. And right now, every angle pointed toward a trap. She entered through the irrigation tunnel, crawling on hands and knees through stagnant water and rusted pipe, emerging beneath a stack of supply crates inside a low storage building. She waited, listening for patrols, for alarms, for any sign that someone had seen her. Nothing came, so she moved, building to building, clearing each room. Like she had 100 times before, and then she saw him. Calder was standing at a table, his hands resting on a crate marked medical supplies. But the contents were not bandages or saline. They were weapons crates of them, stacked like bricks, all labeled with foreign call signs and coded routes. He hadn't changed much, still carried his weight like a man ready to fight. At any second, his sidearm holstered low, his knife within easy reach, and yet there was a slackness to him, a looseness in the shoulders of someone who had stopped looking over his shoulder because he believed no one was left to chase him. She raised her weapon, aimed it at his back, but did not speak her breath. Shallow, her mind racing through every memory, every order, every lie. He turned slowly, not startled, not surprised. And when he saw her, his eyes widened just for a second before he said, "I was wondering when they'd send you." She kept the gun steady, but inside her thoughts were splitting like glass under. Pressure. How long had he known? How long had he been part of this? How many of their squad were dead because of him, and why did he sound like he still believed he was on her side? He stepped forward slowly, unarmed his voice, calm like they were back, in the barracks before the war, before the fire, before the screams. He said, "You don't understand, Elena, you never did. And now, if you don't listen to me right now, we both die out here." Elena moved without thinking, the second the shadow shifted behind Calder. She dropped to one knee, swept her leg wide, and fired a single round into the dark, before the figure could fully emerge from cover. The sound was muffled by the suppressor, but the result was instant. A body crumpling against the metal crate, a rifle clattering against the floor, and Calder turning to see what she already knew. They had been followed, and whoever sent them was not there to talk. She motioned for Calder to stay down, but he was already moving toward the body, checking the gear, flipping the figure over, and cursing under his breath when he saw the insignia, because it was not militia, it was not local, it was someone from her base, someone wearing the patch of their own battalion, and that meant only one thing. Maddox had known where she was going before she left the tent. Calder pulled a comms device from the dead man's vest, scanned it, and then crushed it under his boot. The crunch echoed in, the warehouse like thunder in a dry canyon, and he looked at her with eyes that no longer held any patience, only urgency and fear. The kind that came when a plan was collapsing from the inside. "You were never supposed to get this far," he said, and she didn't answer. Not because she didn't want to, but because the weight of what he meant was still settling into her bones, and all she could do was brace for what came next. He told her everything, not like a confession, but like a man running. Out of time, the mission in Sector 9 had never been what they were told. It was a cleanup, not a rescue. And when it went wrong, when the explosions started and the extraction failed, the brass decided to seal the truth under the rubble and write new orders to explain the dead, but Calder had survived, barely pulled out by a third-party black ops. No insignia, no allegiance, just men with clean gear and dirtier hands, and they gave him a choice, disappear or die, and he chose to vanish into a ghost with a new name and a new purpose, delivering weapons in exchange for secrets, building networks in places where politics failed and bullets negotiated peace. She asked why he didn't warn her, why he let her believe he was dead, and he said, "Because Maddox watched everything, and anyone who asked too many questions disappeared like footprints in sand after the wind. And when your request came across his desk, he knew you were already halfway to the truth, so he sent you here to burn the rest of the way." They didn't have time to argue. The gunfire started 2 minutes later. Fast, sharp, and far too close to be warning shots. The compound was compromised. Maybe someone heard the suppressed shot. Maybe someone expected her to fail and followed through when she didn't. Either way, it meant they had minutes, maybe less, before the entire place was locked down. They moved together, old instincts rising between them like muscle memory. She took high ground. He covered low. They moved. Crate to crate through shadows and steel exchanging words, only through hand signals and narrowed glances. It was like the last 2 years had folded into this moment, and none of it had ever passed. She felt the weight of betrayal, but also something else, something deeper that came when clarity and chaos collided. The truth was bleeding out in every direction, and she had no bandages big enough to contain it, only the will to see where it ended and what price it would take from her next. They reached the perimeter just as the second wave arrived. More soldiers this time, better armed, moving with precision that told her they were trained not mercs, not rebels. These were men who knew her face and were ordered to erase it. Calder grabbed. Her wrist pulled her toward the ridge line. A fallback extraction. He whispered something she didn't quite catch over the wind and gunfire, but it sounded like, "If we make it to the cliff, they can't follow." And she believed him not because she trusted him fully, but because she had no better choice and fewer bullets than she liked. They ran. The night stretched around them, broken by flashes of muzzle light and the sharp ping of rounds biting into rock and dirt. Her lungs burned her legs. Screamed, but she pushed forward because there was no other direction left to run. Only through. They reached the cliff just before the 3rd detachment crested the ridge. Calder dove first, rolled, and came up firing. She dropped beside him, returned, fire, and then she heard it. The thrum of blades in the distance, a chopper inbound low across the valley and moving fast, but it wasn't the one Rayner had promised. This was military, this was marked. She looked at Calder, and he shook his head. Said, "That's not ours." And in that moment she understood the game had changed again, that they were no longer running from a cover-up but a clean-up, and this time there would be no questions after.